Week 11 has come and gone, and we are now on to week 12. But we are not on to just any week. We are into what we call in the industry bye-mageddon. We have some key players on bye weeks, and this video is going to help you counter that by going over some players that you need to be stashing as we get ready to the fantasy football playoffs. And what we'll first do is we're going to first highlight some of the great things that we saw this past week in week 11. And we have to begin with New Orleans, with Taysom Hill absolutely dominating for the New Orleans Saints. Hill had 8 receptions on 10 targets for 50 yards, also saw 7 rushes for 138 yards, also had 3 touchdowns for a monster 45 plus PPR performance for those of you that started him, and it was just a phenomenal output from all levels, and what a great week for Taysom Hill. The next one's going to be the Detroit Lions. They had a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. You saw Amon-Ra St. Brown lead the way with 11 receptions on 11 targets for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jared Goff threw for 412 yards, 4 touchdowns, even had 21 yards rushing. Brock Bowers from the Las Vegas Raiders put on a show. He had 13 receptions on 16 targets with 126 yards, 1 touchdown, giving you 35 plus points in PPR formats. He also broke the record for most receptions in a game by a tight end rookie. And then to put a bow on it, we saw Joe Mixon go absolutely nuclear on Monday Night Football versus the Dallas Cowboys. He rushed the ball for 109 yards, also had 3 touchdowns, also caught his 2 receptions on 4 targets for 44 yards. And before we go over the players you should be adding, let's first go over some players that you should be dropping to make space for these players that you're going to be adding. And the first one is going to be a bit of a heartbreak because this is someone that I was really high on to begin the season, and it's going to be Quentin Johnston out of the Baltimore Ravens. Ever since getting traded to the Ravens, he has not seen anywhere near the production that he saw when he was in Carolina. A lot of it is him getting more and more familiar with this offense. However, this past week, he played 11 snaps, only had 2 targets, and had 0 receptions. And at this point, with the fantasy matchups and your leagues getting more and more intense, you just cannot afford to just wait for Deontay to just pop off. I mean, of course, if you already have a top record and you feel pretty confident with waiting it out, fine. But if you are in a scenario where you have to get a win and you have to make some roster spots, Quentin Johnston would be someone that I would definitely consider cutting to make room for whoever you want to add. This next one is going to be Jalen Waddle. For a couple weeks, I was flirting with the idea of dropping him. I did also jokingly say that you should drop him, but it was more so go ahead and just bench him until you wait and see what happens. At this point, he just hasn't done anything for your lineups to make you feel even confident that he's going to turn it around. This past Sunday, he had 2 receptions on 3 targets for 37 yards. He hasn't eclipsed 57 yards since week 1. And for now, at this point, like I said, we're looking to get some wins for your roster. Unfortunately, Jalen Waddle is not going to be moving that for you in that direction. However, if you can afford to keep him on the bench, great. But if you need that roster spot, Jalen Waddle is now someone that I would comfortably feel like I could drop and move on from. This next one is going to be running back Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns. He did have 11 rushes for 50 yards, so you feel good that he's gotten double-digit targets. However, he's now had 3 straight games where he has had only single-digit outputs, even with the double-digit targets. And when you look down the line, he has 5 games coming up. 4 of those are going to be in tough matchups versus the opposing running backs, where Nick Chubb, I can't expect to see much production from him. So in this case, it is time to let go of Nick Chubb and move on for better options for your lineup. This next player is going to be Travis Etienne from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He has now had 4 straight games with terrible performances. What makes these performances even more discouraging is that they're coming off games where he's actually had double-digit touches. However, this offense looks so bleak, and Travis Etienne has not been productive whatsoever. He has been an absolute bust, especially because he probably cost you a 2nd to 3rd round pick. So Travis Etienne is someone that you can move on from and cut as you go into week number 12. And this last player that you're going to be dropping is going to be quarterback CJ Stroud out of the Houston Texans. And this is kind of a bummer because I was actually kind of high on him. I wasn't high on where he was being drafted this year, but however, I did still believe that he was going to do really well relative to where he was being drafted. However, you're now seeing he has had 5 straight games with sub 20-point performances. This is someone that was drafted to be an elite game changer for you at the quarterback position, even with him not even having the rushing upside, but with the added weapons that he had with Stephon Diggs, and then of course he had Nico Collins as well as Joe Mixon in the mix now to go along with Tank Dell. He just had hasn't panned out. And I know that there's been some injuries there with Stephon Diggs and even with Nico Collins. Despite all that, CJ Stroud has been nothing but a disappointment in fantasy and someone that you could officially move on from, especially considering that there are better options at the quarterback position in fantasy right now. Before we go over the players you should be adding, do me a solid. Most of you are not already subscribed, so if you're getting value, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Let's go over the players you should be adding as we get into week 12. And that first player is going to be Anthony Richardson from the Indianapolis Colts. He was 20 for 30 first pass attempts, had 272 yards thrown in the air with 1 touchdown, also had 10 rushing attempts with 2 touchdowns to go along with it. And it was just great to see him obviously being in an offense that was more so catered to his playing style. And even Shane Steichen too was really pleased with how they were able to come out with the victory and snap their 3-game losing streak. I will say to tread carefully when it comes to the upcoming matchup versus the Detroit Lions, because they do allow the 6th fewest points to opposing quarterbacks. However, I think that for me, because of the rushing upside that Richardson provides, he is a good bet to have as a quarterback option in fantasy. Another player that I want you to add is someone that I mentioned actually a few weeks ago, but someone that is still actually surprisingly available. It's going to be Quentin Johnston from the Los Angeles Chargers. He's currently only rostered in 50.6% of ESPN leagues. He's now coming off 3 straight games with a touchdown. He saw a season high 8 targets in week 11, and he also has a very juicy matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, who allow the most points to opposing wide receivers in fantasy, and that for me makes him a more than safe enough stash to get on your rosters in this week's waiver wire. Another wide receiver I want you to focus on and also get is going to be Christian Watson from the Green Bay Packers. He's currently only rostered in 48.4% of ESPN leagues. He's coming off a game where he had 4 receptions on 4 targets for 150 yards, making it his career high. He also led all Green Bay wide receivers with a 23% target share. And the reason why this is important is because this is now his 3rd straight game where he has led Green Bay wide receivers in this specific category. Now, this next wide receiver I want you to target is going to be wide receiver Elijah Moore from the Cleveland Browns. He's currently only rostered in 9.3% of ESPN leagues. He's coming off now his 4th straight game with 6+ targets or more. He's also coming off a week where he had the best performance where he saw 6 receptions, 8 targets, 66 yards, and 1 touchdown. And one thing to also add about this performance is that he's now 6th among all wide receivers in total route wins. And something that you should definitely take notice when you are looking at your waivers is making sure that you're adding Elijah Moore. And this last part I want you to add is going to be running back Trey Benson from the Arizona Cardinals. He's currently only rostered in 17.3% of ESPN leagues. He's actually coming off a bye, but prior to that, he had 2 straight games where he saw 9+ touches in back-to-back games. And what's intriguing about those 2 games is that he was actually a top 25 option at the running back position. And just to be clear, I am really high on James Conner. I think it's been phenomenal to see him do really well for the Arizona Cardinals this season as well as for fantasy. But one concern that I do have is his injury history. And I'm not saying or predicting that he's going to get injured because it's hard to say those things, but because of the history, I know that if anything were to happen to James Conner, Trey Benson will have a massive workload that will make him a valuable asset, especially as we wind down and get close to the fantasy playoffs. Hey, thank you so much for making it to the very end of this video. Listen, do me a solid. If you got value in this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and check out some of these other videos that I have here on the channel that'll help you out with getting ready for the fantasy playoffs. Until next time, take care. God bless. Peace.